Hello there. This is October the 28th, 2022. Should you have a question for me, do feel free to send it to me by email, aaron@aaronbudgeon.net, and I'll do my best to give you perhaps an answer that you had not considered before with regards to whatever it is you're thinking about. I do have a question presently that I received from Dennis in Oakland, Tennessee. This is about tithing, a popular topic. The question is, I do not want to advocate tithing, yet I hear some grace teachers who do not advocate tithing for new covenant believers, but get a much higher value for a tithe, example 25 to 30%. What scriptures could they use to come up with these higher values? All right, now, of course, for this kind of a question, you really ought to consider asking the person who said it. Definitely. Ask them, what are you thinking? I mean, where did you really get this number from? How did you come up with this? Are you just making this up? Did you just hear it from somebody else who you think did a good job at calculating these things? You really ought to ask the person who said this. But this is interesting. I think this is a very interesting question that you mentioned that these are grace teachers. What are they doing? Saying this about tithing. I'll tell you that what I would be tempted to think about is that they're not getting a lot in donations because they don't teach tithing. It turns out that if you teach tithing, you can get a lot more in donations than if you don't teach tithing. Because when you're asking for donations, you can receive some donations from people who genuinely want you to keep working. That's what it takes to keep working. I keep working because people give donations. If they didn't give donations, I'd have to stop working. I'd have to go do something else, do other kinds of work. Or if you'd like me to do more of what it is that I'm doing, I'm going to need more in donations to be able to work with. So it's necessary for people to do what it is that they are doing. Otherwise, they're not going to be in the ministry. We only have so many hours in every day. We got to do something with those hours in order to meet the obligations that we have or to be able to sustain our lives. But grace teachers who do not teach tithing, they're going to have to depend on these people who will give just because they want you to keep working. For those who teach tithing, they're going to get a different group of people who will give. You're going to get a group of people who are afraid that God is going to punish them, hurt them, take money away from them if they fail to tithe. All right? They either tithe or God is going to go after them and He is going to cause divine intervention in their lives such that they will experience pain and suffering. All right? And so they give because they're being extorted. That's a form of extortion. Give me your money or God is going to hurt you, kind of thing. Somebody's going to come along and hurt you. So, you better give up some money to me. And, in that way, you'll get some protection. We call that a protection racket. All right? It's a similar idea, the idea of extortion. Or there's the promise of blessings. Give money and God will bless you in return. He'll pay you back with plus some extra, because you gave to God. So these are the things that people teach. And when they teach these things, well, they are well funded. They do get a lot of extra money compared to what they would get otherwise. Now, if you've got a grace teacher, somebody who's not teaching tithing, then this can be a way to increase the amount that you might be getting otherwise. Maybe he's only receiving 2% or 5%, half of 10. So he teaches a little bit extra and says, well, they didn't really give 10. They gave 25 or 30. That ups it a little bit so that maybe the people will start to give 10. All right? Maybe they'll raise that 5% up to 10% because the real giving was so much higher. That's what I get the impression of. I mean, that's the first thought that comes to mind when I see somebody saying something like this. But chances are what you're dealing with is you're dealing with someone who didn't really look this up and investigate and calculate this on their own. You probably have somebody who's just repeating this from somebody else. All right? If you will take time to study the law, if you'll study the law of tithing and the law of giving and stuff, then you will find that there were other opportunities for people to give to the priesthood. I mean, there were other opportunities where you would give something. And so above and beyond the tithe, there would be something more than that 10% figure that would be given because of all the other sacrifices and sacraments and things that were a part of the Mosaic law. I would not see a number this high, though, personally. And I have not done this calculation, but I know enough about the law that it's not going to be this high. It'll be a little bit more, but not that much. All right, so there is an opportunity to say there is a little bit more, but there is also an opportunity to say that it's going to be a little bit less. All right, and in fact, there is more of an opportunity for it to be less than for it to be more, according to the extra little sacrifices that you would make along the way throughout the year, and just due to other circumstances in life, that the net equivalent does work out to be much less than 10%. Okay, I personally feel that is without question. So you've got somebody who's pretending to know something that he doesn't know, and you got somebody who definitely does not know the law. All right, those are two things that I would pick up quickly if I was listening to somebody like this. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't have other good things to say. They probably do, But for something like this, let's call it what it is, Let's call it what it is. And this is somebody who just doesn't know what they're talking about, all right, when it comes to this particular subject. That's an easy way to handle this. Now, there are 4 major sections in the law on the subject of tithing. All right, there are several sections for you to look at, 4 major ones, but there's a lot of other ones that you can examine. And it's a good thing to study the law, to learn about the law, to understand the law. It's a good thing. There are many things that God can show you about himself and about the way that he relates to people and about the way that people relate to each other through an understanding of the law. It's a good thing to know. I definitely encourage it. Even though it's not what we live by in accordance with the new covenant, there is still great value there. All right. The section that I'm going to refer to is found in Deuteronomy chapter 14. I'm going to read through that so that you can have an understanding of what I mean by this net value being much less. In Deuteronomy chapter 14, beginning in verse 22, God said, "You shall surely tithe of the increase of your grain that the field produces year by year." All right. Now, another thing to understand about this from verse 22 is that you were to pay a percentage, you were to give a percentage of what you produced. Okay. Now, this excludes services. This has to do with the things that you produce, things that you grow, all right, like the grain, or animals that you raise, a certain number of animals that pass under the rod, that sort of thing. If you're providing a service of some kind for somebody else that does not involve producing something that you're able to claim as your own property, then no, you would not be giving a percentage of what what you did, what you received for the services you provided. That's an important thing to understand about the law of tithing. All right, so you shall surely tithe of the increase of your grain that the field produces year by year, and you shall eat before the Lord your God in the place where he chooses to make his name abide, and that turned out to be Jerusalem. The tithe of your grain and of your new wine and your oil, of the firstborn of your herds and your flocks, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. All right. So yeah, if you produce oil, if you produce wine, it comes from grapes and olives. These are things that are produced. It's not about the services. In verse 24, but if the journey is too long for you so that you are not able to carry the tithe, or if the place where the Lord your God chooses to put his name is too far from you, when the Lord your God has blessed you, then you shall exchange it for money. And in this case, it was silver. Silver is a better translation of that word. Take the silver, the money, in your hand, and go to the place which the Lord your God chooses. So if you have so much that you just can't physically deliver it, then you exchange it for silver, and you deliver the silver. And gold would be accepted as well, I'm sure. But that's when you bring money. You bring money when you have so much stuff that it's just unrealistic for you to physically deliver it. Verse 26. All right, now this is important. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 26. And you shall spend that money for whatever your heart desires. Now, think about that for just a moment. Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 26 says that when you go to deliver your tithe, God said you are to spend it on your way to deliver it. This is required by God, that you spend the money. You spend the tithe. Anybody ever talking about that when they talk about tithing? What might that look like in the modern context, right? Okay, now folks, if you're coming to church next Sunday and you plan on bringing your tithe, make sure that on your way you spend that money, or a part of it. You spend that money on your way. You better spend it on well, what do we spend it on? We'll keep reading, right? Verse 26, God says what you ought to spend it on. And you shall spend that money for whatever your heart desires. Whatever you desire. For oxen, or sheep, or wine, or similar drink. Now, in this translation, it says similar drink, but in the Hebrew, I've looked this up in detail. It means an exceptionally strong drink that will cause intoxication. Spend your tithe on alcohol that is of such percentage of alcohol, of such intoxicating quality that you'll get drunk on your tithe as you go to deliver it. That's what he says, right? Okay, continuing verse 26, right? Similar drink. For whatever your heart desires, you shall eat there before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your household. That's verse 26. So, bring it to Jerusalem and eat there in Jerusalem. So if we were to apply this to the church today, the teacher of tithing should be telling his congregation, now folks, next Sunday, on your way, stop by some place and, get yourself some breakfast, eat some ox or, you may not have ox available, but you could have some beef, maybe some bacon. Well, maybe not that. We don't necessarily want to say that. But when, just whatever your heart desires, consume. And if there's a store open, if there's a liquor store open, go get yourself some really strong, hardcore liquor. Bring it to church. Bring all this stuff to church. Let's have a potluck party with strong drink and lots of food, whatever your heart may desire. That's what you do with your tithe. Okay? That's what he said. Now, you can expect that some people would be tempted to really, splurge, or, to really spend maybe all of what it is that they've got. Now, of course, a person can only eat and drink so much, right? You can only do so much. So fortunately, people would be expected to have produced enough that they'd have so much that on a trip like this, they would not be able to consume it all. All right, but just in case that they take their time in their trip, on their vacation, they take their time in traveling to make the delivery, and when they get to Jerusalem, they might stay there a few more days or weeks even to, well, I'm not quite done with my tithe yet. Just in case, you have to read verse 27, right? Verse 27, he said, you shall not forsake the Levite who is within your gates, for he has no part nor inheritance with you. All right? In other words, don't forget the Levites. And he says this in a number of other places. All right? Now, this particular verse transitions into every third year you are to bring your tithe to your local Levites. But there's plenty of other verses that express this idea even more specifically to the Levites in Jerusalem. Don't forget these guys. So when you go to deliver your tithe, don't just spend it all. Don't just consume it all on your way. Remember that these guys they depend on your donations, okay, in this respect. They depend on this so that they can do their job, so that they can do their work. And the Levites were considered to be the local civil authorities. They were the government. It was a tax, all right, by the government that functioned as the Levitical priesthood, and they functioned as the people who would enforce the law of God. All right, so that's what this is about. Continuing to read verse 27 again, you shall not forsake the Levite who is within your gates, for he has no part nor inheritance with you. At the end of every third year, you shall bring out of the tithe of your produce of that year and store it up within your gates. And the Levite, because he has no portion nor inheritance with you, and the stranger and the fatherless and the widow who are within your gates may come and eat and be satisfied, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hand which you do. And that is the end of Deuteronomy chapter 14. All right, so if you were to consider the law of tithing, no, it would be less than 10% required by God. Even though there are some other laws that relate the idea of giving a little bit more here, a little bit more there. You have to redeem your firstborn, and then you got the annual temple tax. And there's stuff like that goes on. And the periodic sacrifices for uncleanliness or for this sin or that sin. So there was a lot of that went on. But when the delivery was actually made, it would definitely be much less than the tenth that people are presenting. All right, so that's my answer to this kind of a question. If you have any other questions for me, please do send them in to me by email to aaron@aaronbudgeon.net. Thanks.